So what is going on, everyone, and welcome to my new non-pet build for my Magicka Sorcerer. Now this build was more inspired by Alcast and his latest non-pet build. So the difference between mine and his is mostly just the enchants and a couple of CP changes. So I'll explain everything, but when I usually play with different people. Unlike him and his guild, he plays with the same set of people. But I feel like for the average player or just people who do a lot more pickup games or groups, then this might be a little bit overall better. So I'll explain everything I have and why I use it. So this is going to be a little bit more detailed in terms of the build and why I choose certain things. So this might be helpful for you. It's slightly less damage than having a pet build from my testing, but overall I think it is better for trials, dungeons, because with the pet build in the late game vet trials or even the new clockwork one on normal, your pet kind of just dies a lot. So unless you're managing it really well, I think just not running a pet anymore for most situations in late game content is overall better. So let's start off with the attributes and all that stuff. So I did rechange my race to a high elf or Altmer, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but for now let's just go with that. And Magicka and health is 45 and 19. The reason why we have 19 into health is because we actually switched out the potion to Witchmother's Potent Brew, and that one, instead of giving you 5,000 of health and magic, it gives you 3,000, but it does increase your magic recovery, which increases your sustain a lot longer, which is overall good. So I'll explain that a little bit more into detail, but let's get into our gear. So we have 5 pieces of Netch's Touch and body pieces. All of the pieces are divines. Ideally divines is the best right now, and it's probably still going to be like a year later unless they do some drastic changes. Another thing I've been testing is Grothar versus Ilambris, and overall Ilambris is better because of the shock damage abilities. This does fire or shock, whereas Grothar only does flame damage. So Ilambris is slightly better when you do hit the proc on it, and it just gives you a little bit more. So whatever the tooltip says, just kind of disregard that, and it depends on if you proc as well, which so whatever that is what you get. In terms of the medium heavy, Alkash uses 7 light pieces, which increases your sustain, but I use 5 on 1, like 1 heavy, 1 medium, 5 light, just because I like to have a little bit more survivability. So I have 18,000 into health, whereas 17,000 is the safe spot, but I just kind of like playing it safer just because sometimes I play with different people and you never know. Sometimes you get like a good healer or a good tank, sometimes you don't, just an average one. So just kind of staying alive overall is the better choice for me. And I assume for most people who do pickups, you never know what you're going to get in terms of healer or tank. So generally just playing it safe is good. And if I could get divines on that, I would. Or I actually do have a divines heavy. I just have to swap out for a medium, and I need to get that one. So a few things where the build starts changing is I use 4 pieces of Moondancer, and ideally you could run 3 Moondancer, but I use 4, and one of the ring pieces is Magicka Recovery instead of spell damage, and this increases your Magicka Recovery by 169, boosting the total to 1583, which is actually really good. So in testing, it took me about 6 minutes, full raid buffed and all the stuff, to run out of magic completely. That's when the healers were throwing synergies and orbs, so it takes a while, and potions on cooldown, obviously. So it took me about 6 to 7 minutes to run out of Magicka, which is pretty solid in my opinion. And then after that, you could have a spell damage one if you want the extra damage, but I just like having to sustain. And even in the official patch notes, they wanted to mention that they wanted to change whether you have a high burst damage or higher sustain. So I think overall the sustain is slightly better, and I could be completely wrong, but that's just my play style. And in Alcas's build, he uses the poisons. I actually have been testing it, and I no longer use these poisons. The reasoning is we have one ring which gives Magicka recovery, which helps out instead of the poisons. And one, these are also kind of expensive to make. So in terms of the PC and a price checks, it's about 30 gold a poison. And these actually run out pretty quickly. You may think, oh, you have 700. Okay, that's cool. Well, you kind of use about 100 in 15 minutes or less. So that's kind of costly overall. So I no longer use it. Plus, I like the weapon damage enchantment on my main bar, which gives me the extra 348 weapon and spell damage for 5 seconds every time it procs. And that straight up just beats out the 147 or 174 spell damage. And if you were to use a poison, you just completely lose the enchant on this one. So that's why I use 4 Moondancer. If you don't have Moondancer, you could use the Master's Architect. This is just a sample weapon. Just look at the effect, don't look at it. I like getting trolled by Zos when they give me a sharpened resto staff. It's always great. But overall, when it's maxed out in legendary quality, these have the exact same effects. So if you like doing the Halls of Fabrication trial, which is actually a little bit harder than a Maw of Lorcage, but for some reason you like collecting new stuff, the Master's Architect is also a very solid set. It's exactly the same in terms of the 2, 3, 4 effect, so you can use that as well. Infallible Aether is the same thing, except it gives crit instead of magic, so you can do that as well. So that's why I don't use the poisons anymore. I kind of just like having the enchant proc instead, and it also saves me money overall and just not having to craft poisons all this time. So that's kind of good. I calculated it to be about, you run out of poisons, like let's say you are doing a 3-hour event, you'll probably go through about 1,500 poisons, and that's about, I would say, 30,000 gold a stack of 1,000. So it kind of just saves me about 30,000 gold every 3 hours. So by not using it, it's usually just cheaper, and I think you get more damage overall just using the weapon enchant. And then our back bar is the Maelstrom Lightning Staff. The reason why we use the Maelstrom Staff instead of another Moondancer back bar is because it gives 189 spell damage, whereas having a Moondancer gives 129, but you get the enchant of that, so I don't have to run double lightning. And also, I don't actually have a second Maelstrom Sharpened Lightning, so that kind of helps out a little bit. But if you did have 2 Maelstrom Lightnings, the reason then you would use the poisons, because having the effect on both bars does not stack it or anything. So I think overall, slightly having 2 different kinds of lightning staves or staves would be slightly more damage. That's why only running 1 is slightly better. So those are the reasonings for my build. In terms of the differences, I use 1 Magicka Recovery enchant. I don't use the poisons anymore. I use a 4th piece of Moondancer instead of just 3 with double Maelstrom. And yeah, Ilambris is pretty good. I use medium and heavy instead of 7 light armor, just because I like the extra survivability. So yeah, let's go into the champion points now, and then we'll go into the skills a little bit later. So with the recent expansion, the way they changed champion points is look at the percentages, and you have to hit the next 1% for it to carry over. So like if I were to put something into here, just 1 point into Expert Defender, for example, you see how 1 point would give you 0.7%? Now apparently this scales back down to 0, so you have to reach the next full percentage to get the effect. So like 1%, 2%, whatever. And which is kind of dumb. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but you just have to reach the next full number to get the effect. So the reason, or the things I changed is thick skinned, I have 48 into it. If I were to have 49, it would give me 18.5%, but it would only give you 18% in total with the effect. So that's why I have 48. 47 would just take out, it would give you like 17%. So min-maxing is min-maxing. Hardy and Elemental Defender is still capped at 49 because it just slightly boosts over 11%, and that's what you want. Then I have 61 into Ironclad because that boosts me over 21%. And 3 extra points in Spell Shield, honestly, you could put it into whatever. You could, if you're PvPing, you could probably put it into Resistant for crit resistance. And then, to be honest, you could probably put 3 or 2 points or 3 points into Expert Defender if you wanted it. But to be honest, I didn't know what to do with these 3 points, so I just kind of put it into Spell Resistance. And the difference between that is you take 1 out of here and then put it into the Spell Shield just because of that. So 75 into Thaumaturge. Now, if you were to redistribute it, I'm just going to show you. I'm not going to actually change anything. You have 2 extra points or 3 extra points because you want to hit the 23% mark, and then everything above this is what you use to get the Exploiter passive. Now, everything else in this tree is more for stamina-based DPS, so you're not really getting the 3 extra champion point bonuses from the extra 0.4, but we have to have 75 to get the Exploiter passive, and that's why I kind of put it in here. These other 3 are kind of useless. So you're essentially getting 3 extra champion points into here that don't do anything, but we need it to get the 75, so that's why we have it here. Otherwise, if they were to change it where you could just get points into anything else, I would put 72 and like 3 or something, which doesn't actually bring you to the next full percentage. So 75, you're losing 3, but you just get the Exploiter, which is the most important part. Now we have Master at Arms. We have 23 in here because at 22 you get 9.83, and the next one just boosts you over 10. That's why we have that one. And the Elfborn and Elemental Expert, we have 56 because it just slightly pushes us over 12% and 20%, and that's why we want it. So into our green tree, this is where a lot of changes happened. Warlord is because we have to break free out of a lot of things, especially in the newer trial, and that one helps us out a lot, and it pushes us over 16%. 100 into Arcanist because Magicka Recovery is a huge part of our new build, and then 64 into Tenacity because it pushes us over 13%. I do have 4 into Healthy because I didn't really know what to put it into. I kind of like having the roll, dodge, tumbling passive. Not that a lot of other people actually use it. I kind of just like having it. So if I were to take out, if I would have like extra points, I just put 4 into Healthy. I didn't really know what to do with this, so I kind of just put it into Healthy. It was just the best choice in my opinion. Yeah, you could put it into Block if you want, like 2 points into Tumbling, 2 points into Shadow Ward, and then you would have like, I don't know, extra percentages. You could put like 2 into Shade or something, but it's kind of useless. I think just having the health recovery, even if it's 1%, which really means absolutely nothing, it's a little bit better. I like having the 2 extra points into Tumbling and Healthy instead of having like Sprinter. So that's just me. You could do whatever you want. You have to boost your percentages by 1%, and everything in the middle between that, like 1% to 199, is kind of useless. So that's what I have. So that's my champion point layout. It's slightly different, but in terms of like min-maxing, that's what you want. And then let's go on to our skills. It's mostly the same, actually. So Hardened Ward, this is essentially quote-unquote our self-heal. And instead of, if you don't want to run Hardened Ward, you could probably just run Crit Surge or Power Surge, whatever you want. And that one also helps you out. So it's essentially your healing abilities, whether you want Ward or Surge. Keep in mind, you have to crit to heal yourself, whereas Ward just gives you a flat-out shield. That's why I use Hardened Ward. Now we have Force Pulse into our main like spammable ability. Force Pulse, you're going to be doing that. I'll show you the rotation a little bit later, but overall that's what I use as your main spammable ability. And then Destructive Clench is one that I've still been playing with. Obviously, as you guys can see, it's not completely maxed out, but it is morphed. people have been comparing this one versus Crystal Frags, and I still think Crystal Frags does a little bit more, but Destructive Clench, I feel like when it's maxed out, it'll like top Crystal Frags because of the shock damage that it does, and when our Netch's touch 400 points or 400 spell damage, whatever, when you cast this one, it will do slightly a little bit more. But overall, there's still very strong abilities, whether you use Destructive Clench or Crystal Frags. And I think both of them are good choices by just kind of like testing the new things. And one thing with Destructive Clench is it's an over 8-second ability. So the difference between with Crystal Frags is you don't have to wait for this one to proc. And so like when you're using ability, sometimes you'd have to wait for this to proc. Sometimes it may not proc at all, so you don't get the extra bonuses. Whereas Destructive Clench is you cast it over 8 seconds and recast it 8 seconds, guaranteed. So you don't. It's a little bit easier on your rotation, and overall, in terms of damage, I think both of them are just fine. So Inner Light, we still have this because it increases our max Magicka, and we get spell crit increase. If you don't want to use this, you could probably use Crit Surge as well. There's a lot of other things you can use instead. You could use Boundless Storm, whatever. This just gives you more resistances, and it's kind of like Hurricane, except the magic version. So you get movement speed, you get more resistances, you don't die. That's always good. But I just like having the extra Magicka and spell crit because it does increase your damage, while this one increases your survivability. So it's really up to you whether you want. Then we have Bound Aegis on our back bar, or front bar and back bar, because we need it slotted on both to have the effect. And then Meteor on our Mage's Guild, because we have the 3 passives here. Increases the duration, so more dots. Increases your max Magicka and recovery for each one slotted. So we have 2 and 4% total with the passives, which gives us more magic. And then over here, you get Empower. So when you cast the Meteor, for example, and it's maxed out, your next ability will do 20% more. So that's why we kind of use Shooting Star. In terms of the ultimate, I think Shooting Star is better than the Ice Comet just because you want the ultimate regen. Ice Comet is the other morph of it. I think that one's still more of a PvP ability, which does a little bit more damage, but you don't get the ultimate effect of it. So, yeah. That has been front bar. Now back bar, we have double lightning. This is where pretty much all our dots and executes are coming from. So the ultimate, we have the Thunderous Rage, and that one is obviously our Destro ult. It's still very strong. And then Bound Aegis again, because we have to have it on both bars. I did remorph my Daedric Prey into, where is it, Haunting Curse. Since we no longer use a pet, there's no need for the Daedric Prey ability. So overall, we have to switch up our rotation a little bit, but we get like we don't have to cast this as often. This is a double proc. And then Mage's Wrath execute. I was considering one thing, whether I put my Hardened Ward back bar and Mage's Wrath on front bar, but I decided to put it on the back bar simply because I don't have to swap bars during execute phase. I could just reapply dots again and just spam Mage's Wrath without actually having to swap bars. Assuming you have a good healer, you don't actually need to have Hardened Ward up during the execute phase. But obviously, if you do, then switch bars to recast, because staying safe is always better than dying. And that's why we have it on back bar. So in terms of damage, look at the tooltip. It gives you 12,102. If I were to switch it out, it would give me slightly more damage by like 200. But I think just having the ability to not swap bars during the execute phase is slightly better. It saves you about like what, a whole second and a half. And so min-maxing, if you want to have it on the front bar, you'll do a little bit more damage. But realistically, it's like what, maybe 200 extra damage. So whether you put this on front bar or back bar is really up to you. It doesn't actually matter unless you're going for absolute min-max damage. Then I think front bar would be slightly better. Then we have Liquid Lightning, Blockade of Storms. This is why the champion point passive 75 into Thaumaturge is very important nowadays, especially in this meta. I assume most people are going to be running a lightning staff with the blockade, and whether it's your healer or Sorc DPS, that's why having Exploiter is always important. You just straight up get 10% more damage. Now, enemies don't get off balance for the entire blockade, whatever, what is it, like 5 seconds? So you don't get the full 10% all 5 seconds, but you do get a short burst of it. So that's why I'm pretty sure a lot of people just run double lightning nowadays. So it would be in your best interest to get 75 into Thaumaturge just to get the extra bonus. And then liquid lightning, that's just, you know, standard because liquid lightning is a very powerful dot. So overall, what have we been changing in terms of everything else? We used the Witch Mother's Potent Brew. Now this one is kinda, it's good, but it's kinda dangerous in terms of, like, if newer players were to use this potion, their health would be dangerously low. It would be like in the 16,000s or something like that. Whereas using a flat blue potion or food, it just gives you straight up 5,000 health and then 5,000 like magic. Well, this one gives you 3,000 to magic and 3,000 to health. So it does give you more recovery and higher sustain. And I would say if you are a newer player, just stick with blue food. You're not really trying to min-max anything at this point. But if you are doing late game events like trials, dungeons, then I think having the sustain is a little bit better. In terms of price, you can get 2 blue foods for the price of this 1 potent brew. So that's also a thing. But overall, in terms of late game stuff, Witch Mothers is the way to go. But this one is better for survivability. And I use the purple ones. This is the reason why we have 19 into health, because I want to stay above 17,000. Now, I have 18,000 into health because I'm still sort of new with this build. And I like just, you know, not dying is generally better. So if anyone tells you otherwise, you do 0 damage when you're dead. And even if you have slightly less damage while you're alive, it still beats out being dead. So ultimately, play however you want to play. If you think you can go like straight 17,000, then good for you. Do that as long as it works for you. But yeah, Moondancer Thief, same thing. Witch Mother's Potent Brew, and you get all these bonuses for the passives. But overall, this is mostly the same build, except let's just recap a little bit of what I actually changed. So first thing first, I run 1 extra Magicka recovery ring instead of a spell damage. I do have both of them, but I think the extra recovery helps out a little bit more. You can get like 1 or 2 more rotations in a, I don't know, let's 8-minute fight. You can get a few more rotations in, whereas someone else would have to heavy attack and get the resources, which does a slightly less damage, but overall I think it's slightly better. It makes you do better. Second, we have a Moondancer Lightning. We don't have 2 Maelstrom staffs. We also don't use the poisons anymore. One, because these poisons are very expensive. Over time, it will just rack up like thousands of gold over hours. So I don't use poisons anymore. You do get slightly more damage without it, but if you were to use it, my sustain would be a little bit higher in terms of Magicka recovery. But I honestly don't think I need it anymore, just because if you change out the 1 jewelry enchant for spell damage, from spell damage to Magicka recovery, you don't actually need it anymore. Your recovery would be just fine. And you get the extra damage that you lost from this one with the enchant one that procs for 5 seconds. So let's say, for example, you're losing 174 spell damage, but instead of using the poison, you get 348. So it's essentially doubling it when it procs. So that's why I use it. And then, of course, I know not everyone is going to have a Maelstrom lightning staff, because Maelstrom is not an easy thing to complete. So if you don't have one, you can just run a double Moondancer. If you don't have that, you can run like double Netch's touch staves, and you can just like drop 2 body pieces, get 2 staves, and then I don't know, do whatever else you want. You have 2 free slots. I would just, I don't know, do whatever. You could put like, you can actually get 5 Moondancer if you wanted to, or just like, or actually you have to have 4 staves or 1 piece, I forgot. So take out 1 piece over here. You can get a 4th Moondancer body piece if you don't have the staves, but honestly, Netch's Touch is probably easiest to run because you can get in Darkshade 1. So it took me, I feel like I got lucky because I was running with the group. It only took me like 8 runs to get full 5-piece Divines, but then again, I was running with the people who actually didn't need it, so they just kind of gave it to me when they found it. So that's kind of helped out a little bit. So if you're solo farming, it could be a little bit longer, but it took me 8 runs, and overall not bad, quick and painless. And then overall, other things we changed in terms of champion points is we took out 1 from Thick Skin and put 48 instead of 49 into here, and then we have 1 extra in Spell Shield because I really didn't know what else to put it in. And putting 49, I believe, just would give you the 18% flat, and so having 49 would mean absolutely nothing, and 48 would be the same effect as having 49 in this case. So we have the extra spell resistance. Realistically, it's not going to make a difference. You might take 100 less damage, cool. If you still die, you're still going to die. And then 75 into here because these other 3 are not for magic-based abilities, and even though up to 72 is going to give you the effect, 75 you're mostly just getting for the Exploiter, which is very important. It's worth having 3 extra useless points into here to get the Exploiter. Definitely worth, so 75 into here. 23, Master at Arms, because it just boosts. So I'm not going to explain everything over again, but if you learn anything from this video is the champion points, you have to scale it to the next full percentage to get the effect. And I don't know why they did that, but whatever they did, so adapt to it and just boost it to the next percentage. You guys can all test the way you like. And in terms of the green tree, this is the one I really just changed. You don't need the 4 healthy points. You also don't need the 4 or 2 tumbling. You could do whatever you want. I just kind of like it that way. That's how I set mine up. And yeah, overall, that's pretty much it. And more recap stuff is, ideally, you want to have above 17,000 health with food. And I know right now it's at 14,000 minimum, but I also use this food. And then it boosts me over 18,000. And then if you want to use blue food instead, what I would recommend doing if you are going to use blue food only is take out some into health. You don't need 19, you say like 5 to 7 into health, and then the rest into magic if you're using blue food. But if you're using purple, then I think you have to boost your health a little bit higher. So that's pretty much it in terms of all the abilities and everything I use. I hope you guys learned a little bit. Most of it was the same, but I just changed a few things to cater to my playstyle. So here's the thing in terms of the build. The way I play doesn't always work for everyone else. So if you found a build that you like, just keep playing that one. Usually when people ask me, what's the best thing to do? Why should I do this race instead of that? I just tell people, play whatever makes you happy. If you don't like playing a sorcerer, that's completely fine. If you don't like doing pet builds, then do this one. If you do like running a pet build, I do actually have another video that has the pet build. So you could watch that one. I'll leave a link in the description. So you can watch that one. Whether you like playing pets or no pets, up to you. Now that you just have a choice to do whatever, feel free. Let me know which one you guys like more, and have a fantastic day. I'll see you guys later.